We are there.
Okay, everybody's back in, so.
Huh?
He moved.
I'd like to call this meeting to order.
Yeah.
If you could mute yourself when you are not sharing something, that would be much appreciated. Welcome to the Bloomington Rotary Club's weekly celebration of service for September 29th, 2020. I'm your current president, Ashley Sullivan. Thank you for being here. Michael, please show the flag graphic for 15 seconds of respectful silence. Remain on mute and take this time to personally reflect.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'd like to introduce Jim Bright, who will be offering our reflection today.
Thank you, President Ashley. On Sunday afternoon, the spirit of Paul Harris was alive and super well at Memorial Stadium, where 70 Rotary Paul Harris Fellows gathered for the drone flyover video. Our goal was to position ourselves on the football field in the shape of the Rotary logo for a video to be shown at our November 6th Bloomington Rotary Toast. The event quickly became a celebration of fellowship, just as it might have 115 years ago when Paul Harris founded Rotary in Chicago. It was wonderful to see so many members of our Rotary family, especially after 6 months of being holed up with for the pandemic. Now, Rotarians social distance themselves every 6 feet around a circle, as you can see there in the upper left. And the drone flew by, zeroing in on faces of individual Rotarians and spouses before finally rising into the sky and showing our attempt at creating the Rotary wheel there on the 50-yard line at Memorial Stadium. Now, just mention the photos on your screen. At the top, of course, is you see the Paul Harris Fellows forming a circle. And the bottom left, left to right, that's President Ashley with her fiance, Nick, District Governor Jessica Hayne, Tom Gettinger of the Sunrise Club, and our own Owen Johnson. Bottom center, as you can see, good news, looks like our own Jean Emery is finally coming out of her shell. And in the bottom right, of course, is our toast honoree, Bob Hamill. Bob, by the way, will turn 84 years old on October 20th, just a couple of weeks ahead of the Rotary Toast. Well, were we able to pull it off? Well, tune in Friday night, November 6th, when we honor longtime sports writer and author Bob Hamill, and proceeds will go to Hoosier Hills Food Bank. Tickets start at $25 per household, and for tickets, go to rotarytoast.com or see me. Thank you, and back to you, President Ashley.
Thank you, Jim. That was a really great photo of the whole wheel. That was awesome. Thank you for sharing that. It was a lot of fun. Okay, we would like to introduce our guests today, and starting with Connie, who has 2 guests. If you would tell us about them.
Oh, my guests are Jim Poyser and Stephanie von Hirschberg. And they, well, not coincidentally, they are both climate activists. And no coincidence that they're here today because they're going to listen to Ben Brabson. And I have a terrible feeling that Ben never got the Zoom link, and that's probably my fault. So he now hopefully has it, and Ben will be joining us soon. Yikes, was I supposed, oh, okay, sorry. So Stephanie von Hirschberg and Jim Poyser. Jim Poyser actually just finished publishing a book of a collection of short stories. And again, they're both climate activists.
Thank you. And Aaron Davis, would you introduce your guest?
You're on mute.
Okay, it took a while to unmute myself. Molly O'Donnell is here, and she's also a climate activist and very strong environmental advocate with the UU Environmental Justice Task Force.
Welcome to Molly. Thank you for inviting her. And I see Randy Wheeler is with us again. Welcome, Randy. You've become a fixture of our meetings, and I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. Are there any other guests?
Technically not a guest, but we have with us today Aaron Brewington, who works with Liz Irwin at Smithville, and Aaron is a organizational member. Aaron is the photographer who took those photos you saw on the screen a little while ago. So welcome, Aaron. And then
I have a
also,
guess. Oh, go ahead.
also I see on the screen Bob and Ann Wren, and Ann, a longtime member of our club. It's so good to see you both, Dr. Bob and Ann Wren, and Bill Oates joining us from South Florida. So good to see you, Bill.
Liz?
I was just going to say Ann and Bob are my guests, but that's fine. They're introduced now. Thank you.
Welcome, doubly welcome, Ann and Bob. So good to see you. Okay. Thanks to our producers, Michael Shermis, Sally Gaskell, and Natalie Blaze. Roundabout reporter for this week is Glenda Murray. Happy birthday to Vaughn Welch on September 30th, tomorrow. And we don't have any membership anniversaries this week. Rotarians in the news. Past President Joy Harder's father, Jack Kahn, received a 2020 Golden Hoosier Award from Lieutenant Governor Suzanne Crouch and the Family and Social Service Administration's Division of Aging. Suzanne Crouch made the following comments, and I think they're very important to read to you. So many of our senior citizens are exceptional role models in their communities, and these 24 Hoosiers have made long-term commitments to volunteering in their neighborhoods, towns, and cities. These unsung leaders make positive impacts on the lives of others and improve the overall well-being of our state. Thank you for your service in answering the call to give back. Those awards started in 2008 and annually honors Hoosier senior citizens for their years of service. This year's ceremony was held on Wednesday, September 23rd, and you can watch it on the Indiana government website, and the link will be in the roundabout. Congratulations, Jack, and it's very evident where Joy gets her joy and her commitment to service to our community. So want to give a special shout out to him. Owen Johnson has an article that was published in the summer issue of Traces of Indiana and Midwestern History entitled Ernie Pyle and Harriet Davidson, Two Red-Headed Travelers. Harriet Davidson was Pyle's girlfriend at IU, and when he spoke to our club in June 1922, Harriet married a doctor in Bedford, and after Pyle died in the early 50s, Harriet took up a career, after he died, her husband, excuse me. After he died, she took up a career in travel, and she was affiliated with a travel agency here in Bloomington. So interesting read if you pick up the issue of Traces of Indiana and Midwestern History. And Charlotte Zitlow has a new book that is officially available for you to read. Before becoming a local political powerhouse in Bloomington, Charlotte and her husband, Paul, spent a year in Czechoslovakia as part of an educational exchange program. She says in her new memoir, Minister's Daughter, One Life, Many Lives, with Michael G. Glaub, that the experience proved American democracy was worth fighting for. You can read an excerpt from the book through Limestone Post, and it's available for purchase from the Book Corner on Amazon or wherever ebooks are sold, or from Michael Glaub's, you can email him directly. This will all be included in the roundabout for easy reference, but congratulations, Charlotte. I cannot wait to read it. So, woohoo. And I'm sure she'll share more during Happy Dollars later about this exciting new development. Okay, so we have a quick activity that I would like to do before we jump into our presentation. District 6580 will be hosting Zoom talks on different causes that might be of interest to Rotarians called Rotary Roundtables. The plan is to send a survey to all Rotarians in the district with a list of different causes and topics to allow them to select what they would be interested in hearing more about. So I would like to spend just a few minutes brainstorming different causes or topics that you'd like to hear people speak about. And this will help the district team select these speakers for the roundtables. There will be anywhere from 1 to 3 speakers on a given topic, and the objective is to inform and inspire you. At the end, the call to action will be either small things that you can do locally or other meetings you can join to move the ideas forward. So I have kind of an interesting platform to try this out, or you can enter your ideas in the chat, but you can go to meet.ps/RotaryRT, and I'm going to put it in the chat here, and you can enter your ideas there. This is something I want to try. You can open this in a browser window or on your phone. I want to try this to see if we can use this as a poll for future meetings. If you're not comfortable with using technology in that way, no worries. You can just enter some ideas in the chat, but this is a fun way to enter your ideas so I can keep a catalog of them. So you can just highlight that into your browser and it'll open up and ask you the question and you can enter your idea, or on your browser on your phone. So we can also do a live chat.
Ashley?
Yes.
Can you give the address again, please?
Yes, it's in the chat and it's meet.ps/RotaryRT. But we can also do a live voice chat too. If anyone has any ideas they'd like to share, things you'd love to hear about, causes you'd love to hear more about, topics that you're interested in. Anyone? You have the floor.
Ashley,
Yeah.
this is Sally. I'd like to hear more about how Rotarians can make an impact with social justice issues in our communities.
I agree. I agree. I'll second that.
Great. Thank you. Any other ideas?
Tim Jessen suggests youth organizations in the chat.
See that. Great. Usually such a talkative bunch. Are you trying my technology? Oh, I see some good suggestions here. Yeah. Homelessness, equity and inclusion, racial justice, peace building.
Environment.
Absolutely.
Access to health care.
Can we grow pollinator gardens?
Yes.
Pollinator gardens.
Where's Ben?
Ben's here.
Okay, well, I'm going to leave that link open for the rest of the meeting. I'll even leave it up a little after our meeting so that if anything comes to mind, just enter it there. And it'll be an ongoing conversation, and you'll start to see over the next months some ideas coming from the district of things you can sign up for. So it should be really exciting to get some deeper insight into issues that are affecting our world and things that we're interested in as Rotarians to get involved in. And the action step is really what I'm excited about, things we can do to get really involved in these ideas and take them from the idea sphere out into the world in an actionable way. So looking forward to that. Thank you for your suggestions and keep them coming. In other district news, There's a goal of having every Rotarian in District 6580 with a Facebook profile to like the district page. This will get all that great information out. You can see more than just what's happening in the Bloomington Rotary Club. You'll get to see the whole district and broader than that as well. So go to District 6580's Facebook page and give it a like, and you won't be disappointed. We have a few volunteering opportunities coming up. Adopt a Road. We will have a cleanup on World Polio Day, and I just got word that my request for a mayor's proclamation has been accepted. So it is World Polio Day in Bloomington on the 24th, and come dressed in your purple and all your Rotary gear, and we'll clean up our road and hopefully have some awareness of our polio eradication efforts at the same time. Helping Hands is always available. Wheeler Mission and Teachers Warehouse. Those are our three ongoing volunteer opportunities. Check the roundabout for more information there. And we have just a few minutes here for some happy dollars. Anyone have anything to share?
I'd like to give several happy dollars in honor of Ben Brabson. 45 years ago, his son and my son shared a room in the Bloomington Hospital Pediatrics unit. And Ben explained to my son why the water in the bathtub went around and around when it was going down the drain, which I'm sure made Eric a physics major. So welcome, Ben, and happy dollar for you.
Wonderful. Lovely, lovely.
I'd like a happy dollar. This is my first cast at age 67.
Oh my.
It's about time.
I hope you're doing okay, Liz. If you were in person, we'd all sign it. You just
That's
have to
right.
imagine it.
It's beautiful. Okay, I'm going to give 6 happy dollars, 6 big happy dollars for the 6 years it took Michael and me to work on that book. And I had to tell stories to a recording, and then he asked me questions, and then he wrote a kind of, he framed it within the context of whatever was happening in the world at the time. So it was a big job. And it's it's so exciting to have this really there. I can't believe it. I hope it's interesting. I kept saying, why are we doing this? And he said, because it's interesting. I said, I don't know about that, but I hope it is.
It certainly is, Charlotte. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Okay, thank you.
I see in the chat that Sally has shared that Voces Novae is now rehearsing every Monday from 6:45 to 7:30 at Showers Plaza. So we're all welcome to come and listen. We should do that and wear your mask. Very important. Anyone else? Okay, well, without further ado, I would like Connie to introduce our speaker for today.
Ben Brabson is my first Rotary speaker pick, and I forgot to send him the Zoom link. Oh, Ben. Okay.
Oh, Connie, not to worry.
Well,
You did
I'm
it.
not worried. Remember when you just clicked with someone? Ben Brabson is one of my recent clickers. We've met only by phone and now by Zoom. I hope that changes soon. This physicist is too modest to tell you much about Ben Brabson, so I will throw out a few terms that apply. PhD, MIT, 1966. Thesis in high energy physics. MIT postdoc, 1967. Got a National Science Foundation Fellowship for his postdoc year in Padua, Italy, 1968. Magna cum laude, choral singing, rock climbing, tennis, skiing, basketball, gentleman, scholar. Many say that physics is the natural science. Simply put, for my brain to get it, physicists study matter and energy, how they interact, and how they behave in time and space. I quote from Ben's recent comments about a climate change book he co-authored. The numbers you'll hear refer to experiments he designed for school children. Quote, as a kid, I really resonated with number 33, stop mowing, let the grass grow. I hated to mow the yard. Of course, we didn't have to worry about number 3, limiting a shower to 5 minutes. As I recall, we didn't really mind a little dirt. Mother had to insist on a bath every Saturday night, no excuses. Speaking, end quote, speaking of shorter showers, like me, I hope many of you will soon think about Ben as you step into the shower.
Connie, you're a dear. Let me see if I can live up to your marvelous introduction. The first thing to do is to see if I can share my screen, because I do have a couple of little plots I want to show you. It's scary business working with these climate scientists, but let me see what happens. So here goes. I'm going to try to share the screen. You tell me whether it works. If it doesn't work, we'll do something else. So here goes. I'm going to try this first and see whether that works. Did you get share? Did anything share? Can you see anything on the screen? It should say something about Rotary.
Yes.
Oh, it does. Oh, good. Now I'm going to try another trick, and that is to see whether I can enlarge it. You tell me whether this works. Now, did that work? Because if it did, that would be really cool.
Yes.
It did. Yes. All right. All right. We're in good business. I am overwhelmed and delighted to be asked to speak to you at Rotary, because your values are very much my values in every sense, and I just missed your vision statement there. All right, so here we go. Showers, bananas, and climate change, and all those things that go with it. So I'm going to do this first. I'm going to take that little guy away. All right, can you see? You can see it, yes. And there's Connie herself, and I'm going to ask her whether she really likes bananas or not, but she doesn't really have to answer that.
Yes, I do.
Yes. Oh, good. All right, well, that's a good sign. All right, well, what I'm going to do, so I am really a climate scientist, and I can tell you just a tiny bit about what I do, but I think much more important is to talk to you and listen to you and answer some questions about climate change. So what I'm going to do is spend the first 5 minutes just talking about the science itself, a little bit about temperature and carbon dioxide, and I'm sorry, but those are the key points and they're important. And then I'm going to talk about what happens here in Indiana, because that's where we are, and that's really important. And then I'm going to talk finally for the last third of the talk, the last 10 minutes or so, about what we do, if anything. So should we eat bananas or take showers or not? You never know. So let's go on and see what happens next. What I'm going to try to do is go to the next slide. I think I know how to do it. Okay, did it work? Is it all right? Can you see it? This should be pretty terrifying. All right, I'll read you my conclusions first. My conclusion is always very simple, and that is that we are obliged to move away from our own non-sustainable and climate-damaging fossil fuel use as quickly as possible, and that we're clever enough to figure out how to do that. And that's my feeling today, and that was my feeling 5 years ago, and perhaps even 5 years in the future if I'm still around. So there we are. The picture below just shows some recent burning in Butts Canyon Road in California, Phoenix, 50 days with high temperatures at or above 110 degrees F. That doesn't sound like Indiana, but it shatters a previous record of 33 days from 2011. So things are indeed changing, and they're changing in a way which is nasty business. This is a highly depressing picture, but I show it. It comes from Karachi in Pakistan, taken in May of 2018. Those folks are not dead. They're simply lying on the pavement, on the sidewalk, to cool off. And so this is an example of an extraordinary situation where the Earth can actually reach temperatures that are hot enough so that if the so-called wet bulb temperature rises, you really can't survive. That's not good. So you really want to pay attention to that. And this is a reminder of the fact that we are not living in Pakistan, but that we are indeed influencing the way other peoples live in Pakistan. Okay, a couple of plots, and then we'll talk about things that are a little bit more interpersonal. This just shows temperature over the last 60 years, starting from 1960 up until the year 2020. Can you see my little arrow if I wiggle it? There's my little arrow wiggling. Can you see my little arrow, or do only I see the little arrow?
Yes.
Oh, you can see it. Oh, good. So starting in 1960, I could go all the way back to 1890 or whatever, but let's start in 1960. And what you notice is that this little plot shows an increase in temperature year by year. So these are simply average temperatures year by year up through 2019. And it doesn't go to 2020, and that's because 2020 isn't finished yet, but it will soon be. So let's take a look at the blow up piece over here. And what you see over here is that that's 2016, that really highest one. And then here's 2019 over here, and 2020 is actually already going to be about here. It's a little bit above 2019. So it's not going to be the hottest year that in the last several hundred years of recorded history, but it's going to be the next hottest year. So let me remind you that you can be fooled by people who talk about temperature, and so you have to be a little careful. Let's suppose that you didn't see that last 5 or 6 years and you just put your finger over those last 5 or 6 years. I can't quite do it here, but if you just ignore those last 5 or 6, you could believe that maybe the temperature was rising, and then suddenly starting in 1998, when we had a really hot year, it sort of flattened out. And there are some people who even argue that maybe it was flattening out and going to go back down again. Well, you have to realize in climate data that there are always all sorts of variabilities. You notice how uneven this curve is. It's not just a smooth curve, it's a very uneven curve because some years are hotter than others. And you really do have to use a smoothing curve of some sort to get the trend. The trend is definitely up. So that's a concern. That's a real concern for us climate scientists, and it's a concern for you too. If you look on a longer scale, this is the last plot I'll show, which is really an ugly one, but if this is just the last 100 years over here, the very, very far left, very far right end, and that's the rise of temperature at the beginning of the 20th century, and then there's a little wiggly spot in the middle, and that's the rise we just looked at over here at the end of the 20th century, and there we are at 2020 up there at that yellow dot at the top. So the thing to note is that yes, there are wiggles in the past. There's the medieval warm period when there was the settling of Greenland and so forth. Then there was a mini ice age when you could skate on the ponds in Netherlands. And then there's 2020 up there. And I think the thing to keep in mind is that 2020 and all the years in the last 60 or so are pretty special. Something really, really strange is going on. So it's not wiggly, wiggle, wiggly, wiggly, wiggly stuff here. It's really something pretty dramatic going on there. So let's see what it is that's doing that. And that requires a tiny bit of history. And here is a person whom I did not know about until just 2 years ago. And her name is Eunice Newton Foote. Now, Eunice Newton Foote is an interesting person because she actually grew up in she grew up in the same town, Seneca Falls, where much of women's rights and other things began and were very important. She was an American scientist, an inventor, and also a women's rights campaigner. But she also, as an American scientist, did some really simple experiments. One of the experiments she did was just to take 2 jars and put a thermometer in each jar. And then in one of the jars, she put carbonic acid gas, which we call carbon dioxide nowadays. And in the other, she didn't. She just used regular air. And after a very short period of time, back in 1856, she discovered that the temperatures in the CO2 one were much hotter than the temperatures in the regular air one.
Oh my goodness.
That's pretty cool. Sorry,
Yeah.
I heard a question. Yes? Is there a question? No, you're okay. Okay, so that's an interesting observation because that's one of the very first observations that carbon dioxide was pretty special. Then along 3 years later came a gentleman who called John Tyndall, who became very famous for his work. But of course, unfortunately, Eunice Newton Foote was left without her proper position in history for many, many years. He actually understood that it is also the infrared component that is being absorbed by the atmosphere. So that's interesting stuff, but that's part of the absorption of heat energy by carbon dioxide, which turns out to be important. So you look, I apologize, there is one more graph. Here it is. That's just carbon dioxide over the last 60 years, from 1960 up to 2020. And I expanded over here a bit, or actually the NOAA people expanded a bit over here. And that's carbon dioxide rising as time goes on. And what you notice is that it goes up and down year by year. And my question to you is this: why is it, these are in months, so there's the month of August, there's the month of July, there's the month of June, there's the month of May. So why is it that the carbon dioxide is actually going down right now? And that's a serious question. And Connie, you can answer it because you're the chief person there that I know, but there are lots of other folks I know there as well. So question to you, lovely folks, why is it that carbon dioxide all summer long was going down in the world? Any thoughts about that? Well, I might have to pick on somebody whom I know knows the answer. And that, well, I'm not going to pick on anybody, but I could, of course. Any ideas about why carbon dioxide is going down in the summer?
Absorption by trees and other growing
Absorption by
things.
trees, good. Trees are wonderful. How about the trees in the southern hemisphere? Well, they're there too, but they don't have as much effect because there aren't as many of them. So the northern hemisphere really wins. If you look on a longer scale, then there's that same CO2 plot, and it goes up to this incredible value of 412 parts per million, which it is where it is right now. And what you notice is that back here in 1880, there was the 1800 rather, there was the Industrial Revolution, which began, and then there was the increase in CO2 from its sort of baseline value, which it had for thousands of years at 280 parts per million. Suddenly now it's up at 412 parts per million, quite a bit higher than 280 parts per million. Unfortunately, that has a lot to do with the increases in temperature. Okay, enough about the science, except just to talk about one of the consequences. And that is that if you warm the atmosphere, you also warm the ocean. And as you warm the ocean, of course, it melts sea ice. And this just shows an example of the typical example of sea ice in the Arctic in the period from 1981 to 2010. So that red wiggly thing there is where it usually is. And here is where it is this year, some 20 years or 10 years later, some 10 years after this average period. So what you can see is that you're losing sea ice. And that's kind of cool or kind of not so cool. It's cool if you want to sail from over here in Norway over to, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Let's go back. If you want to sail from Norway all the way over to China over there, you could just draw a straight line right through the ice. But the ice is there, which is annoying. So what you could do is notice that that little E right there is at the North Pole. And the projection is that by, in about 20 years, we will actually not have any ice on the North Pole in August anymore. And you'll be able to go straight from, well, from England, if you will, or Norway, if you will, straight across to China. That's pretty cool if you like that kind of thing. On the other hand, there are some dramatic consequences that happen. Look at all this blue stuff here, which used to be white. That blue stuff now is absorbing solar energy, whereas it used to reflect it. This leads to something which is not pleasant, and that is you can actually get into a situation where the energy which is coming in from the sun intensifies more than it did in previous years, and you get what is called a positive feedback loop, which can be indeed quite dangerous, and one which we climate scientists worry about a lot. Okay, so let's go on. In Indiana, is there climate change or not? That's the question. Well, maybe Indiana is special and we somehow just avoid it. Everyone else around us is doing climate change, but we're not. Unfortunately, that's not the situation. And there are two groups in Indiana that are wonderful sources of information. One is at Purdue. I don't talk about that one. Well, I could talk about that one. Well, I will talk about that one just a little bit. And the others here at IU, which of course we rejoice and jump up and down about. And that one is being led by Janet McCabe. Janet McCabe is its present head, and it's called the Environmental Resilience Institute. It is a wonderful source of information. And if you need any information that is useful in this talk, it will be only this, and that is you write down somewhere on a piece of paper or on your eyeball, ERI, and that's all you really need to know. ERI is the Environmental Resilience Institute, .iu.edu, and that gets you wonderful information about what is actually happening here in Indiana, and I'll show a tiny bit of that. The other source, which is equally important and good, is at Purdue, and it is Indiana Climate at Purdue. So if you just do remember the Indiana Climate piece, that's great. Two wonderful places here in Indiana to get information. So I pick one piece of information which is interesting to gardeners. So, all right, gardeners, think about your hardiness zone. You know about hardiness zones. You know you have to grow roses only in certain hardiness zones. So let's look in 1990 to see where we are here in Bloomington. There's Bloomington right where my little arrow is wiggling. And you'll see that we're more or less in that dark greeny one, which is zone number 5. In 1990, we were in zone number 5. That was the way it was, and life was very pleasant. And then jump to 2015. I guess we could go to 2020, but I don't have those data because I'm not doing this Purdue work. But at Purdue, they have discovered that in Indiana, we're now looking in the rather light greenish end. In fact, we're getting pretty close to the yellow end. If we look at the light green one, that's zone 6. So already, gardeners, we've jumped from zone 5 to zone 6 in the last 25 years, with a chance that we may actually join even the yellow zone, which is zone 7. At that point, you have to be really careful about what you grow. Okay, so are we really moving the state? Does the state literally pick up and move? Yeah, just no, it doesn't. But there are interesting things that are taking place. One is that as you look at climate models, and now I'm not talking about data, everything up until now has been talking about real climate data. Now I'm talking about climate models, which project what's going to happen in the future. You'll notice that Indiana up here, which is where it is effectively moving south in the summer. Our south movement in the summer is due to exactly the effect you've seen, and that is you're getting longer periods of growing time in each year, and you're getting warmer temperatures. And so if you're talking about growing plants and other things, effectively we are moving downward. By 2050, says the model, will be down in Middle Tennessee. And if we don't change our habits about using minimum carbon or producing minimum carbon, by the time we get down to 2080, where I will certainly be gone, long gone. I guess a few of you will still be around. I was looking at some gray hair, so I'm not completely sure. But if any of us are still hanging around in 2080, you might shout, well, I didn't hear too much shouting, but if there were some shouting, we would be down here almost indeed on the border of Texas in 2080, say our climate models. So that's impressive. That says what's happening. Well, if you don't mind warm temperatures, then what's the big deal? Well, there are several big deals. And one of them I point out here about Indiana has to do with the crops that are very important to Indiana, namely corn and soybeans. As you know, those are our two financially most important crops in Indiana. And what you notice is that those two plots show that if I look at the production of corn, the yield of corn, and I plot it against temperature, as the temperature rises, unfortunately, the yield goes down. So it means that you actually get less corn in hot years than you get in cool years. The same is unfortunately true of soybeans. And if I'm a farmer in Indiana, I care about that. I really care, because as temperature rises, as it is doing, both of our cash crops then decrease in productivity. There are some things we can do about that, one of which is to encourage our farmers, for example, to enrich their soils. If you enrich your soil, you remember you put more carbon in the soil. That's how you enrich them. You put many of the corn shocks back in the soil, for example. Putting carbon into the soil turns out to be a really good idea from the point of view of enriching the soil in farming. Think about another detail. Is it also useful to take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into the soil? Interesting thought. Could, for example, farmers take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into the soil? And if so, could they be rewarded for doing so? And at the same time, of course, enrich their soils. That's a proposal which is now getting some legs in Congress, and one which I think is a brilliant one. Okay, so here we are, and there is this Norm Crampton, marvelous recycler who has written books on recycling and has actually been the head of recycling in Indianapolis and other places, has written a book with Jane St. John. Jane is a person here in Bloomington who has done many things, including the business of trying to encourage us to do a bicycle sharing program here in the town. The pair of them are magnificent human beings, and I have enjoyed enormously having a chance to work with them for the last year. And we put our hands together and put out a little book which is called Hands On. Now you're going to hear for the next 5 minutes about Hands On, and there you are. I think the thing that I would mention about Hands On is that it's a shared enterprise, and it's one, I think, which is actually available at the book corner downtown. That's my thought. So what about that book? You'll notice that if I go back and look at the cover of the book again, it says it's not for us. It's for the people who are in Generation Z. Well, what the heck is Generation Z? Well, maybe we could be in Generation Z. I sort of sometimes feel like I'm in Generation Z, as do you, because it's kind of fun to imagine that we are somehow between the ages of 5 and 23. That's not quite right, but it feels good to be between the ages of 3 and 23, or 5 and 23. So here are some Gen Z folks who are doing wonderful things. They're doing weatherization of houses here in Bloomington, and it's just a marvelous group of folks who will change the world, quite frankly. The rest of us will help, but they're the ones who'll do it. Okay. So what does the book do? Well, it has 50 projects. It has 50 different things you have to do, 50 tasks, only 50. That's easy. You can do the first one right now, but just by taking a banana and eating it. And then you can do the other 49 later in the day. But it's a nice book because it lists 50 things that we can do, all of which reduce our carbon footprint, which is a fancy way of saying it reduces the amount of carbon dioxide, which we have now learned is indeed something which is dangerous to the atmosphere and increases the amount of increase in temperature. So let's talk bananas. I guess what I should do is find my bananas. You can't see them, but I have some bananas here. I'll hold them up just in case you remember what they look like. They're sort of long and skinny things, and they're kind of fun. And I don't know whether you can see them in my picture, but I'll hold them like that so you can, just in case. All right, so why is it that eating bananas is a really good idea? Well, it turns out that bananas have a really low carbon footprint. How is that possible? I mean, you have to carry these heavy bananas all the way from somewhere in Central America, and you're telling me it's a low carbon footprint, and I just wasted all that natural gas or gasoline or worse, airline fuel. We wouldn't do airlines for bananas, but we could. How is it that bananas actually turn out to have a low carbon footprint? Well, it turns out that Mike Berners-Lee wrote a book called How Bad Are Bananas, and he gave us some really interesting information. The first thing is that they grow in sunlight. That is, the sun comes in and converts its carbon, indeed in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide, into bananas. That's pretty cool, okay? The second thing that's nice about them is that they actually keep well. And so you don't have to refrigerate them. You can just actually put them in a freighter and send them up. Now, they actually do refrigerate them, I learned from recent reading, but you wouldn't really have to refrigerate them if you didn't want to. You can put them in special atmospheres, which will keep them from spoiling as quickly, and that helps. But if you can actually just transport them by freighter, then you don't have to fly them by air, and that means they're probably much better than things like raspberries. The other thing is, of course, they have their own packaging. They're thick, peelable, compostable skins. And so what you do is you don't have to wrap them in plastic. The bottom line is this, and this is where my part comes in, and that is that if you actually want to calculate the carbon you get from bananas, it actually only costs about 3 ounces of carbon dioxide to do the full life history of a banana. And that's to be compared here with a 4-ounce cheeseburger, which it says is 88 ounces of CO2. So if you have a choice between a banana, 3 ounces, or a cheeseburger, 88 ounces, then obviously you should pick a banana, which is 30 times better. I'm almost done, but I want to make 2 other comments, and then we'll stop. Okay, so I guess the most important thing I can imagine about the little book, Hands-On, is that it has a lot to do with making a scientist, and or an engineer. Engineers and scientists are sort of the same sorts of people. But I'd like to make one from scratch. So how do you start with nothing and turn it into a scientist? Well, that's kind of a silly question, but actually it turns out that if you take a mix of curiosity and add to it some opportunities to explore, that you have a good start for making a scientist from scratch. If we, as old fogies, add our enthusiasm and appreciation to these young upstarts, that's, I think, equally important. It's nice to be curious. I think all of us are curious at some level, and all of us are, I think our curiosity sometimes grows and sometimes shrinks as we get older, but my sense is that most of us have lots of curiosity when we're young, and we're really willing to do all sorts of clever and interesting experiments. Finally, then, it says, if I'm a young person, I should see myself as an investigator, and I should enjoy becoming an expert. There's something really cool about becoming an expert. And there is Tamara Hirschland learning how to change the temperature on a water heater. So she became our expert in the IC group. And so whenever we had to deal with water heaters, then Tamara was the one who did the work. So she was the expert in that area. Now, I don't know whether she is going to become a scientist, but I would not be surprised if she did. The final detail is becoming a little bit quantitative. Can you measure it? And that's where I'd like to go one step further. So here we are in the shower. And of course, I quote to you from the book. It says, "What? Shower time is my own time? Of course. But you may find it, if you give it a try, that you can intensify that nice warm feeling, knowing you're doing something good for Mother Earth." So Hands-On says, our family of 3 could save $59 a year and CO2 from driving 1,000 miles. That's pretty cool. That is, if you could actually reduce your shower time from 10 minutes to 5, that would be really nice about reducing your CO2 use. So now comes the fun part, and that is we're going to spend just a minute doing an experiment. How in the world would you, let's suppose, put on your Z generation hat for just a moment, and let's suppose I asked you to actually figure out whether you're going to save anything by taking a 5-minute shower rather than a 10-minute shower. Well, the first thing you need is a bucket, and you need a watch. And so what you do is you walk into the shower. This is dangerous, but you walk into the shower with your watch, or you can put the watch outside and the bucket inside, and you turn on the shower and you actually measure the amount of water that flows in about 15 seconds. If you measure it for 5 minutes, the bucket will certainly overflow. So you measure it for 15 seconds and you come out, you have to then calculate how much water you have saved by saving that extra 5 minutes of shower. That's easily done. You and I can do that. It takes a piece of paper and a tiny bit of effort. However, the interesting detail goes on. How much energy have you saved in that process? And what do you need to determine that? Well, if you're a young experimenter, what you need to do is determine the temperature of the water. So you take your little thermometer and you measure the temperature of cold water and you measure the temperature of hot water. And by golly, you can very quickly convert temperature from cold water to hot water into energy saved, and energy saved converts then into CO2 reduced if you know something about how much energy it takes to produce energy, for example, in an electric water heater, or if you don't, if you have a gas water heater, you can do that too. So the neat thing is that with very little effort and curiosity, you can actually figure out from scratch whether Ben Brabson's calculations in the back of Hands-On are right or not right. So in summary, do showers and bananas really matter? I mean, it could be that doing showers and bananas is just a fringe effect. That's something you do just for fun, and that if you really want to solve climate change, you're not going to do it by doing showers and bananas and even hands-on. Let me quibble with that a little bit. I'm going to do a quickie calculation in front of your eyeballs and see whether that is really important. So in the world, in a nutshell, we generate 40 billion tons of CO2 a year. That's what we do, 40 billion tons a year. There are 8 billion people, more or less, and if we divide 8 billion into 40 billion, I get 5 tons of CO2 per year per person. So everyone in the world generates, on average, 5 tons of CO2. 5 tons, that's 10,000 pounds of CO2 a year by everyone in the world. Okay, keep 5 tons in mind for just a moment. In the US, we actually generate about 9 billion tons of CO2. If I divide that by our people, which is about 0.3 billion, it means we get about 30 tons of CO2 per person. So that's not 5 tons. We're actually generating 30 tons of CO2 per person in the US. That's a lot more than the average, and we know it's a lot more than the average. The interesting detail is this, and that is about 1/3 of that generation comes from the stuff we do at home. So about 10 tons a year is stuff you will find in Hands-On. Now, Hands-On makes it pretty easy to reduce a lot of things in particular, and I find that it's very easy to reduce your carbon by about 1/3, say 35%. If you reduce your carbon by 35%, you've just reduced your total CO2 output from 10 tons down to 3.5 tons of carbon dioxide per year per person. All right, so going back to compare that with the world average, which is 5 tons, we are now saving 3.5 tons a person just by doing Hands-On. All right, so it is important, it is interesting, you can make a difference, and it is significant. In summary then, climate change is underway. It's severely driven by carbon fuels, and the more we generate, the worse it gets. Climate change is sometimes called a threat multiplier. It makes extreme temperatures, drought, storm severities, floods, hurricanes, species loss, and human migration worse. So there are 2 responses. One is nothing, denial, business as usual. I've heard that expression recently, and it leads to a highly unprepared future. And the second then is a commitment, personal response, read Hands-On, and eat more bananas, and take shorter showers. Interestingly, you also might read or see on video Katharine Hayhoe's TED Talk. Connie, that's it, lovely person. I am finished. So I am ready for questions, or if I've overdone my time, you tell me what I should do next.
Ben, thank you so much. Do you have a few minutes to stay after we officially close?
Delighted. I would be delighted, and I'm here, ready to go.
Okay, so we will officially close our meeting here so that people can go on their way. But then we'll come back to you with questions because I know several folks have some. So Sally, would you tell us about next week's meeting?
Yes, it's an election year, and our club is known for attracting newsmakers, and that includes candidates for critical elected office. We always offer the opportunity to both Democrats and Republican candidates. And this year we have both candidates for the always important Indiana 9th District of the United States Congress. Next week is Andy Ruff, Democratic candidate.
Thank you, Sally. Michael, will you show our graphic to close our meeting? We will recite the four ways.
So I'll undo my share. Okay, we'll get started. Of the things we say and do, first is it the truth? Second, is it love or concern? Third, goodwill or friendship?
better friendship.
Fourth,
Beneficial to all concerned.
and fifth,
Is it fun?
okay. That officially concludes our meeting, but now we have time to ask Ben some questions. So
I have a question. I have a question for Ben.
go ahead.
I have a couple of friends who are big time farmers, and I'd like to know physically how they can put carbon back into the soils, not only from their crops, but also from the air. I've never heard of that.
You're still muted, Ben.
You're muted, Ben.
There we go. Thank you. Excellent question, Andy. There are several. The simple ways, of course, are taking all the stover, all the remnants of the crops that you grow, and making sure that those get turned back into the soil at some point. Now, it is true that there is a no-till farming, which makes it difficult sometimes to grow crops and then immediately turn around and plow them back into the fields, especially if you're not doing plowing. So that's a non-trivial exercise. You're right. So one has to think about that. There is something which is called carbon cowboys. Just write those two words down for a moment, because carbon cowboys turns out to be a really nice short video of farmers in Minnesota, in this case, who are showing interesting ways of using animal waste in soils to enrich the soil. It turns out that they have clever ways of asking the herds, or moving the herds from one field to another rather quickly, in such a way that the animal waste itself turns out to be an excellent enrichment for the fields as they grow. There are other techniques which are now coming online, one of which is to produce carbon in an intense form. You can actually produce carbon from several of the processes of extracting carbon from power plants. You can actually extract carbon from power plants and use that carbon dioxide to produce then carbon-rich material, which can be used actually directly to put back into the soil in a remarkable way. I'm missing the key word, but I can send it along at some point. But that's a second strategy that works pretty well, and that is using carbon directly. Let me leave it there for the moment.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
That's a little bit off topic, but we're in the chat room, and you're a churchman and you're a musician, and I'd like to know, and Sally would like to know, when will we be able to sing again?
Oh, you're asking all the right questions, Tim. Well, I'll tell you what, tomorrow night, our barbershop group is going to sing on my back deck. So we have a big back deck, and so we're going to spread ourselves out. And we did it last week, and it worked 2 weeks ago, and it worked pretty well. So we're going to stand on the back deck and sing, and that is a great, I'm looking forward to that with great pleasure. Fortunately, tomorrow night looks as if it's going to be a lovely night. Your point, Tim, however, is that this is quickly collapsing around our ears as we move into the late fall and winter, when standing on Ben Brabson's back deck is going to be less than comfortable. So the question is, then what happens next? Well, with our little barbershop group, we're looking right now, and this is a wonderful opportunity for me to ask lovely folks, do you know of churches or synagogues or other places with large venues, such as First United, that has a big sanctuary where we could stand more than 6 feet apart and actually exercise our voices in that wonderful resonant chamber? So singing is something I miss terribly, Tim. I'd love to see us take advantage of large indoor spaces, realizing that that may not be the long-term answer, but in the short term, we may be able to do some of that. Are you having some success learning, figuring out places to sing?
No.
Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
I do, if I may.
Oh, please.
Oh, first of all, I want to thank you, Mr. Brabson. I deal with a lot of IPCC data, Paris Agreement, and listening to you today, at least I understood it better today. So thank you very much for putting it in a way that I think is easier understood. My question to you is that I think Bloomington does a decent job with our greenhouse gas emissions reduction as far as our carbon output. But I guess my overall question is, how effective is it if Bloomington, for an example, could get down to 0 by 2050, but the communities around us did not, and even globally or across the United States? So how, not to say that we shouldn't, but how effective would we do it if no others are doing it as well, at least to that level?
Jim, your question hits us all directly in the middle of our concerns. I suppose what happens is, in my somewhat enthusiastic and perhaps very enthusiastic, but less realistic perhaps view of the world, the people who actually manage to make the difference turn out to be largely young people. They turn out to be people who grow up in a different environment, who are already fully engaged in the process of cutting carbon, and who have gone well beyond the level of understanding the costs. They actually are seeing that not only do you save carbon, not only do you save the total CO2 amount and temperature rise, but you actually begin to save real cash by doing the things that need to be done. So there is a lot of example. Bloomington serves as an example, of course, for the state of Indiana in many different ways, and that is expanding. Let me give you just one small example. In Indiana now, starting several years ago, there are churches, of course, in Indiana, and churches and synagogues. Bloomington now has 7 institutions that have solar panels on their roofs or on their churches, and that number has now expanded to 50 in Indiana. So things that come around go around. That is one of the things we're doing right now as part of Earth Care here in Bloomington is to seek out ways to encourage other congregations of all kinds to consider that fairly dramatic but very effective way of saving energy. That's the kind of thing that I think works. It won't work if we simply pronounce that we are clever and cleverer than you, and we should do something which is that you should follow our wonderful, clever example. That is a dead end start, and that won't begin at all. It seems to me that if you find areas where others benefit directly from things that you can help them with, there may be some common interest there.
That's good.
Thank you.
So Ben,
I have a question also. One question I would wonder is, during the pandemic, we noticed a significant decrease in people, of course, using their automobiles and air traffic. Did that really, did they measure how much less CO2 was in the atmosphere? Were they able to do that and notice a significant change?
Carolyn, that is an excellent question. We looked at that plot that I was showing, showing CO2, and it looked as if it was just rising and rising and rising. If you look really carefully at that plot, you will see that the amount we added to the atmosphere this year was about 8% less. Well, if we don't know all the way to the end of the year, but but it looks as if by the end of the year, we will have actually added this year 8% less than last year. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to show up very much on that plot, because what's happening is the plot, instead of rising by its usual 40 billion tons, is now going to rise only by 32 billion tons, or it won't be 32, it'll be 36 billion tons, or 37 billion tons. So 37 billion is less than 40, but it's going to be hard to see that 3 billion on top of the 37 billion each year. So we are adding 37 billion instead of 40 billion. That will show up, and it can be measured and is measured, and it's a wonderful thought, and eventually that will have an effect, but it won't have an effect in that visual, lovely plot that I showed you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, Charlotte. Yes. How are you?
Hi, Ben. I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you.
Can you give us an example of what the ERI is doing here? What are their projects?
The ERI,
yes.
You have to say more. Tell me what you're talking about.
The group that's here on campus.
Oh, I beg your pardon. You mean tell you a little bit more about the organization on campus.
And what sort of projects there are going on?
Oh, yes. 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 Wonderful question, Charlotte. Yes. Their major project. They have many projects, but the one which is most impressive to me is the fact that they are working to help cities in Indiana become resilient.
Yeah.
And that the cities are responding to that request. That is, Janet McCabe and her predecessor have set up a lovely set of seminars. Those seminars are now being attended by mayors throughout the state.
Great.
And elsewhere, but mainly mayors throughout the state who really do need to know whether changes in, for example, water flow, in precipitation, in damage coming from flooding, drought, that they need to know what they need to do now in preparation for 10 years from now. 10 years from now is fairly clear. We can fairly easily predict 10 years. Predicting 20 years is hard. Predicting 10 years is pretty straightforward. And even 20 years, you can make a pretty darn good guess. So cities need to know that now. That's what the Resiliency Institute is doing. The ERI is really concentrating on educating and working directly with people in Indiana who are in positions of city government, which you know well.
Yes,
so
that
is simply brilliant stuff.
That's great.
And it's happening weekly. I mean, every week I sit and listen to a new podcast by ERI every week, and they bring in people from around the state, and it is not a small group. That right now I would say that perhaps 80% of the major cities in Indiana are paying close attention
Excellent.